Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the musty curtains on some truly peculiar Victorian sleep cures. Imagine this. You're pacing across a candlelit bedroom, shadows stretching against faded wallpaper, your mind buzzing with fears about cholera scandal, or whether you accidentally insulted your neighbor's bonnet this morning. The bed looks soft, but somehow feels menacing, and you know you're in for another night of tossing and turning. Insomnia is clawing at your nerves, and the world outside seems as restless as you. Oh, and you probably won't survive this, at least not without a lettuce-stuffed pillow, a tepid bath, or a gulp of laudanum to knock you out. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your local time and where you're listening from down in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a cold wooden floor, the lamplight trembling with every step, wondering if sleep will ever come. Victorians took this dread seriously more than you might imagine. After all, a tired mind was seen as a mind vulnerable to temptation, scandal, and worse, poor productivity. In a world where factory whistles ruled the hours and moral sermons clanged in your head, failing to rest was nearly a spiritual failing. Insomnia felt like a curse, a weakness that had to be tamed by any means. And the night was long, stretching like an endless corridor, filled with creaking floors, echoing clocks, and worries about everything from unpaid bills to your sickly cousin coughing in the next room. You might notice the gentle scent of wax as you shuffle around because most bedrooms still ran on gaslight and candles. Fire risk kept people tense, sometimes even half awake, but they had no choice. Flickering flames left odd shadows in corners, encouraging that gnawing anxiety that something was creeping closer. No wonder people were desperate to find any cure that might help them forget the night, if only for a few hours. One popular sleep doctrine was to go to bed early after all moralists loved to warn that idlers who stayed up too late risked their very souls. Of course, that didn't help when your head hit the pillow and your brain refused to shut up. The world had changed so fast from small villages, where darkness simply meant sleep, to big cities rattling with trains, horse hooves, and factory gears grinding through the night. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution truly made sleeplessness worse or just made people more aware of how restless they'd always been. Meanwhile, household manuals boomed with advice. Keep your thoughts pure, your curtains thick, and your mattress firm, but not too firm. These authors meant well, but they had little understanding of what we'd call sleep hygiene today. They blamed restlessness on anything from heavy meat pies to, quite seriously, a sinful heart. A respectable Victorian might lie there half the night worrying about moral purity, while also secretly wondering if a spoonful of laudanum might shut the whole system down. Imagine you're them. The clock ticks, then chimes, then ticks again. You hear the faint scurry of mice behind the wainscoting, reminding you that even the finest townhouses couldn't keep pests away. You sigh, thinking maybe your fortune should have gone to a better exterminator rather than a new lace nightcap. The night is endless, and every creak of a floorboard sets your nerves tingling. Of course, not all was grim. Victorians were inventive. If anything, they were too inventive, testing one cure after another like an over-caffeinated wellness influencer. They packed their bedrooms with folk remedies and commercial tonics, hopeful that a sleepy miracle was just one potion away. Some swapped their feather beds for horsehair to cool the body, believing warmth caused the brain to race. Some hung sprigs of lavender over the window, trying to scent away nightmares. And yes, some even invited the family doctor over only to hear the dignified man advise them to drink nothing after dusk, as if thirst alone was keeping them awake. Every household, from grand manors to working-class rooms over a shop, fought its own night terrors. The gentle snore of a neighbor, the shouts of a drunk stumbling home, the clip-clop of hooves in the distance, all these sounds folded together into an urban lullaby that was anything but restful. A calm, pitch-black night was a rare blessing prized almost as much as a coin found in the street. And so the battle began night after night. You, a faithful Victorian, would keep one eye on the sputtering gas lamp and one ear on the clock, hoping you'd finally doze off before dawn broke. Because if you didn't, you'd face another day of foggy thoughts, clumsy manners, and the sneering gossip of neighbors who seemed to sleep like blissful logs. The fear of becoming known as a light sleeper was real, a social mark of weakness, or worse, a sign you were secretly fretting about a guilty conscience. They tried everything, these night warriors. From pillows plumped with lettuce leaves, yes, we'll get there, to the gentle simmer of barley water on the stove. Each evening was an adventure, in hope, sometimes a silly one, sometimes a desperate one, but always sincere. So tonight, slip on your best imaginary nightcap, fluff up the goosefeather pillow, and prepare to dive deep into these outlandish yet oddly relatable stories. You might discover you're not so different from those anxious Victorians, fretting under 1,000 small worries, hoping beyond reason that sleep will come if you just follow the right ritual. You stand beside your stiff, buttoned-up bed, and there it is again, lettuce. Yes, lettuce. That humble salad staple was once the star of the Victorian sleep world. As ridiculous as it sounds, lettuce was praised as a natural sedative, a gentle helper for the nerves. Victorians believed that lettuce, particularly the milky sap in its veins, had a soothing effect on the anxious mind. So they did what only a truly sleep-starved society might do. They stuffed their pillows with it. Lettuce leaves, carefully dried and crinkly, were layered between cloth and horsehair stuffing. You lie down, hoping that the faint scent of greenish bitterness will lull you to dreamland. Of course, you might wonder how on earth did that help modern studies would politely call this nonsense, but Victorians were stubbornly hopeful. Lettuce was linked to the Greek word lactuca, meaning milk, and its sap reminded people of opium's milky juice. Someone somewhere decided that had to mean lettuce would calm the mind too. Historians still argue whether any of these ideas came from ancient medical scrolls or were simply homegrown wishful thinking. But it wasn't only lettuce pillows. You'd also be encouraged to sip a weak lettuce tea before bed. Picture a copper kettle on a sooty stove, a handful of limp lettuce leaves thrown in with lukewarm water, then strained into a chipped porcelain cup. One sip, and you'd swear you were drinking vegetable dishwater. And yet there was comfort in the ritual. The gentle warmth, the act of holding the cup, the scent of boiled leaves, it told you that you were trying. And sometimes the simple belief that you were doing something, anything, was half the cure. In wealthier households, you might even find lettuce tinctures sold by wandering apothecaries. Bottled in tiny vials labeled lettuce sleep essence, these potions smelled suspiciously of cheap wine with a lettuce leaf floating in them. But the label claimed miraculous results, promising soothing rest and unbroken dreams. A desperate Victorian would have gulped it down without a second thought. As you rest your head on the lettuce-scented pillow, your ears pick up the rattle of carriage wheels outside. The city never fully slept, which only made your insomnia more stubborn. You could imagine your neighbor 2 houses down doing the same thing, cheeks flushed from another failed night, desperately stuffing even more lettuce into their pillowcase. It almost turned into a sleepy arms race who had the best bedtime cure, who had the softest, most sleep-inducing stuffing who had tried the latest herbal brew. And if you still couldn't sleep after all that, well lettuce poultices were another more desperate option. Imagine spreading cold mashed lettuce over your temples, hoping its coolness might still your racing thoughts. Sure, you'd smell a bit like a salad, but at 3 in the morning, who cared? Your family might tease you lettuce on the head, really, but at least they understood the stakes. A bad night was no small inconvenience. It could wreck your entire day, invite shame, and even according to some grim moralists, doom your soul. Victorian society was obsessed with a well-regulated mind, so the idea that lettuce could tame your restless spirit was worth the trouble, no matter how silly it sounds to you now. Meanwhile, the lettuce trade itself benefited from all this nighttime worry. Greengrocers happily sold extra heads of lettuce to city families who would never think of eating them raw at that hour. Lettuce farmers probably smiled behind their baskets, knowing the sleepless public would pay double for their crisp leaves. Even children were given lettuce sleep pads, little cloth bags stuffed with wilted lettuce, tied around the forehead like a leafy crown so their nerves wouldn't run wild. Of course, doctors had mixed feelings about these folk cures. One Victorian physician wrote a letter complaining that the smell alone would keep a man awake, while another claimed, rather optimistically, that lettuce might soften an inflamed stomach and therefore ease the mind. Historians still argue whether any of these medical men truly believed in lettuce or just wanted to keep their patients occupied while more powerful opiates did their work. You close your eyes on your creaking bed, imagining that faint green aroma wrapping around your brain like a sleepy fog. Maybe there is a bit of placebo magic in it. After all, the act of carefully arranging lettuce, of believing in its power, is a ritual that soothes in its own right. And rituals matter, don't they? Whether it's your modern sleep podcast or a lettuce pillow, the repetition calms something deep inside, a sense that you're in control of your night. Maybe, just maybe, lettuce gave these Victorians a sense of agency, of battling their own fears in a world that felt out of their control. You can practically hear their sighs of relief as they flattened their lettuce pillows one more time, the leaves crackling faintly, hoping that tonight at last they might find rest. And if not, there were always more remedies to try, more strange experiments waiting in the next dark hour. You stand next to the battered tin bath steam, barely lifting from the water, wondering if this sorry puddle of lukewarmness will do a single blessed thing for your weary brain. Victorians had a curious obsession with the barely warm bath, believing a tepid soak could calm overexcited nerves without shocking the constitution. Hot water, far too dangerous, they warned. Cold water, practically torture. But a mild, blandly warm bath that was their sweet spot for encouraging sleep. Imagine you're easing one foot into this thin broth of water, shivering a little, because, let's be honest, it's more room temperature than cozy. The bath smells faintly of soap shavings and maybe a pinch of lavender if you were lucky. Its purpose was simple: lower the pulse, calm the nerves, and never ever excite the passions. Because, of course, in the Victorian mind, the passions were always lurking, waiting to pounce the moment you got too warm. Historians still argue whether these bath prescriptions were rooted in genuine medical logic or just another moral panic about bodily urges. A properly tepid bath seemed to promise safe, non-stimulating rest. You'd pour in water by the bucket, maybe sprinkle a spoonful of baking soda, if your household could afford such a luxury, and then sink down carefully, knees peeking out like startled islands. The bath was meant to be a neutral zone, neither invigorating nor chilling, a sort of damp lullaby for your rattled mind. There you'd sit surrounded by the thin slosh of bathwater eyes, half closing, while you listened to the gentle plinks from the leaky faucet. If you were lucky, no one would barge in, no servant with news of a broken lamp, no neighbor pounding on the door about a runaway chicken. A calm bath was precious. It's quiet, stretching out like a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, you could sleep tonight. Of course, let's not get too romantic. Victorian bathrooms were often chilly, drafty, and smelled of moldy wooden floors. You had to keep a careful grip to avoid slipping, since there were no rubber mats or safety rails, and a tumble into a wash basin could ruin your evening. And as a final insult, you'd often share bathwater with other members of your household, each taking turns in the same tepid soup. Hygiene was a cooperative affair, if not a somewhat dubious one. You'd pat yourself dry with a towel about as soft as sandpaper, then slip into a nightgown still faintly damp because the air was so cold. Your skin prickled as you hurried to bed, hoping that lingering warmth from your neutral bath might stick around long enough to coax you under. At least you could brag the next morning that you'd followed the best recommendations. Who could accuse you of ignoring your doctor's advice? Some households, if they had money to spare, would add a tiny measure of chamomile or rose oil to the bath, believing these herbs would seep into the skin and smooth away nightmares. Even the poor might find a wilted posy of rosemary or mint to toss in, because the gentle herbal scents offered a break from the daily stinks of coal smoke and sweaty streets. There was something comforting about even the smallest whiff of green in that half-warm tub. If the bath failed, there was always the ritual of dabbing cold water on the temples afterward, to seal in the calm. You can picture a worried father, sleeves rolled up gently, pressing a damp rag against his daughter's forehead, muttering reassurances that she would sleep like a lamb. The science behind this, practically none but the ritual, was everything. And sometimes ritual is stronger than science. Your thoughts might wander while you soaked to tomorrow's worries. Another bill to pay, a letter to write, an unexpected visitor to feed. In these moments, the lukewarm bath was a sort of quiet confessional, a place to rehearse your fears. It gave you space, a watery pause in an otherwise unstoppable day. And maybe that was the real gift of these mild baths, a forced moment of calm. Mainstream medical journals from the time would promote these lukewarm baths with an almost religious fervor, praising their ability to draw forth bad humors without stirring the vital organs too much. Bad humors were the ever-blamed villains of Victorian medicine, blamed for everything from headaches to marital disputes. Historians still argue whether this obsession with bad humors was a leftover from medieval theories or just a convenient way to scold people into behaving. You tiptoe out of the bath skin, a bit wrinkled hair damp and clinging to your neck. The gas lamp flickers as you dry off, and you wrap yourself in your scratchy flannel gown. Maybe you shiver a bit, but there's a strange sense of relief, too. You did the ritual, you followed the steps, you played your part in the long battle against sleeplessness. And as you slip into bed, you cling to that quiet hope that the mild bathwater still lingers inside you, calming your dreams. Because tomorrow you might face another long day, another night's fretting, and another round of tepid water. But tonight, at least you tried, and for a Victorian trying, counted for a lot. You stare at a small brown glass bottle, sitting on your bedside table, its label promising blissful and immediate sleep. This is a laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, swirling in its deceptive amber glow. Victorians, in their anxious quest for rest, often turn to these powerful potions, chasing oblivion in a world where the mind refused to quiet down. You swirl the liquid, watching it coat the sides of the bottle with a slow, syrupy slide. A few drops on the tongue, and you might slip into a soft, heavy darkness. The trouble is, no one could quite predict whether you would wake again or how muddled your thoughts might be if you did. Opium was a friend and a menace. It offered peace in the night, but threatened to steal your days. The Victorian medical establishment both worshipped and feared this bitter cure. Laudanum was handed out for coughs, for muscle aches, for melancholia, and most certainly for sleeplessness. Its warm, numbing hug felt like a lullaby in a bottle. You, restless and wide-eyed under the gas lamp, might think one spoonful couldn't possibly hurt. And yet historians still argue whether its dangers were properly understood or simply ignored in the blind rush to soothe society's endless insomnia. The stories of laudanum's grip are as haunting as they are fascinating. Picture a well-bred lady, cheeks pale, sipping her measure each night until sleep arrived, and then slowly, night after night, requiring a bit more to find the same peace. Or a factory worker, crushed by fatigue, staggering home and tipping laudanum straight from the bottle, desperate to drown out clattering machinery still ringing in his ears. There was no discrimination in laudanum's reach. Rich or poor, it would embrace you all the same. Even children were given laudanum in smaller doses, wrapped up in syrupy, soothing cordials that parents thought harmless. Today you might shudder at the thought, but for them it was a lifeline, a way to quiet a baby's cries or grant a mother a night's rest. The bittersweet truth, the line between medicine and poison, was vanishingly thin, a distinction blurred by desperation. You sip a glass of cool water to wash down the dread-hearing carriages rolling through the night outside. Some Victorians would have lain awake tormented by fears of addiction, their minds half scolding, half relieved. But others, well, they simply didn't care. Better to risk an opium dream than face another night of spinning thoughts and pounding hearts. A particularly strong laudanum might taste of raw spirits and a hint of iron cutting across your tongue in a way you would not soon forget. It left a burn in the throat and a deeper burn in the soul. A few joked it was like swallowing darkness itself. And once you'd grown accustomed to that kind of night's mercy, a lettuce pillow seemed laughably weak. Doctors tried to issue warnings. Pamphlets appeared speaking solemnly of habitual narcotic reliance, but the public was torn. Could a person truly be to blame for seeking peace? And if you had no other escape from the clawing restlessness of an overworked, morally suffocating society, then what choice did you really have? You stretch under your blanket, imagining a time when there was no Netflix, no podcasts, no phone screens to drown out anxiety. Just you, the lamp, the clock, and a mind unwilling to sleep. A bottle of laudanum might have seemed as reasonable as a cup of chamomile today. And as odd as it sounds, Victorians found a strange poetry in its use, a way to surrender, to hush the thoughts, to temporarily release the soul from its daily prison. There are stories of laudanum-inspired dreams, half waking, half floating, where strange figures danced behind closed eyelids and voices whispered from distant corners. One woman described seeing angels lifting her across seas of golden wheat. Another claimed a terrifying darkness swallowed her whole. These dreams became part of laudanum's twisted legend, the seductive promise of calm, wrapped around a kernel of dread. Of course, not everyone succumbed. There were brave souls who resisted the opium siren, sticking to lettuce water, barley tea, or even tepid baths. They would look on the laudanum users with pity or maybe envy, wondering which path truly led to a gentler night. Historians still argue whether laudanum was the savior of a generation or the secret destroyer of its dreams. As you turn on your side, picturing those rustling bed curtains, you can almost hear the hush of a wife scolding her husband for taking too much, warning him he'd become a ghost of a man if he carried on. But the husband would shrug eyes heavy, desperate for a break from the ruminations that clawed him night after night. And so the amber bottle stood guard on countless nightstands, the last line of defense in a war against insomnia no lettuce poultice could ever win. If you'd lived, then you might have reached for it too, running your finger around its cork stopper, wondering if tonight was the night you'd finally sleep through till dawn or never wake up again. One more echo of the clock, one more hush of the street, and the bottle waits glimmering in the lamplight, a tiny promise of peace no one dared fully trust. You crack open the bedroom window just an inch, letting in the night air that feels somehow heavier than the day's. But here is where the great Victorian debate begins, the fresh air question. Was it salvation or a subtle killer? You feel a tickle of breeze against your cheek, and you wonder if you should slam the window shut again, remembering the warnings from your aunt. Night air will weaken your lungs. Victorians were positively obsessed with airflow. They believed the air after dusk could carry mysterious miasma's poisons, or even moral decay that might seep straight into your chest while you slept. Newspapers offered grim warnings about night breezes carrying illness into otherwise healthy homes. And yet another camp swore by the importance of fresh, circulating air. No stale room can soothe a sleepless mind, they insisted. Historians still argue whether these fears about night air were a genuine public health worry or a leftover scrap of medieval superstition. In any case, Victorians spent endless hours fussing over window height curtain weights and how best to direct the tiniest draft. Some swore by opening a vent near the floor to let the bad air out while keeping the dangerous night chills away from the head. Others slept with their heads practically out the window, convinced that only open air could truly settle their frantic hearts. As you stand there half shivering in your thin nightgown, you might be reminded of today's sleep gurus, who champion blackout curtains, white noise machines, and perfect room temperatures. In that same spirit, Victorians tried to hack their environment. With the tools, they had layers of curtains, weighted sashes, and carefully placed screens. The goal was always to control the night, to tame the darkness and turn it into an ally for rest. One curious method involved dousing the floorboards near the bed with vinegar, the theory being that vinegar could cleanse the air, while also keeping insects at bay. You can imagine a tired housewife, vinegar bucket in hand, sprinkling carefully while scolding her children not to step in it. The smell alone might have kept you awake, but at least you could feel you'd done something about the night's mysterious poisons. Meanwhile, city folk especially feared the urban fog, that greasy, coal-soaked blanket that rolled in off the streets after sunset. Some said it poisoned the lungs, others that it stole your very sleep. They would slam windows shut at the first hint of soot-smelling breeze, then lie awake in stifling, airless rooms, coughing at the thick candle smoke they themselves created. A lose-lose situation, if ever there was one. You pause to listen. The night outside is hardly quiet. Horses clatter, a baby cries somewhere beyond the lamplit window, a cat yowls in an alley. In a weird way, these sounds bring comfort. At least you know you aren't alone in your sleeplessness. Someone else out there is awake, breathing the same suspect air. There were fringe experiments, too. One inventor tried pumping filtered air through a long cloth hose that snaked into the bedroom, promising to deliver pure oxygen straight to the sleeper's pillow. The contraption looked like something from a mad scientist's workshop, but desperate customers paid good money to try it. You have to admire the dedication, even if it meant spending the night attached to a wheezing hose like a fish on dry land. And if the open air felt too risky, a compromise was possible: sleeping in a conservatory. Imagine a night among potted ferns and palms, your iron-framed bed wheeled in beneath a glass dome. The theory was that plants would refresh the night air, soaking up bad humors and releasing clean, sleep-inducing oxygen. Historians still argue whether anyone truly benefited from these leafy nightcaps or whether they simply woke with a stiff neck and a healthy respect for drafty windows. The quest for perfect air seemed endless. Household manuals laid out strict rules: do not place your bed against an outside wall lest cold radiate straight through you. Never hang wet laundry near the window. Do not let pets share the bedroom, for their animal breath was suspect too. You can practically hear a worried mother listing these rules to her children while tucking them in, determined to protect them from every unseen breeze. And so you lean against the window frame, a swirl of night air stirring your hair, torn between closing out the world or letting it wash over you. There is something deliciously human about that moment, the eternal question of whether to retreat or to breathe freely. With a final glance around your lamplit room, you decide to leave the window cracked just a sliver, so that maybe the night's soft sighs will cradle you into sleep. The risks, the superstitions, and the endless theories all swirl through your mind, but in the end you crave that tiny breath of freedom. The reminder that the world beyond your gaslit walls still exists, waiting for you to wake again. You sink down into the depths of your mattress, your bones begging for rest, and immediately you're reminded of the Victorian debate over what exactly made a bed fit for peaceful sleep. Some swore by mountains of goose feathers so soft you'd feel nearly weightless. Others insisted on horsehair stuffing, stiff, scratchy, but believed to keep the body cool and the mind untroubled. Victorian bedding was practically a battleground of moral and medical opinions. A feather bed was cozy, but too cozy, claimed the strict. Its warmth could excite dangerous passions and lead to feverish dreams. Far better, argued the moralist, to rest upon a bracing horsehair mattress whose firmness was said to discipline both body and soul. You squirm against that rough support, wondering if it's helping your nerves or simply punishing them. Historians still argue whether horsehair mattresses really supported clean, healthful sleep, or were just another miserable tradition kept alive by medical caution. But a bed was never just a bed. It was a symbol, a social marker, a sign that you took sleep seriously. If you invited someone to inspect your mattress, and yes, Victorian guests were nosy enough to do this, it better demonstrate that you were a respectable person who treated slumber as a moral duty. You fluff your imaginary pillow, the filling lumping in unpredictable ways, and remember how entire families fretted over bed-making rituals. Feathers had to be aired in the sun, horsehair had to be beaten to chase out dust and fleas, and everything had to be turned and shaken daily to drive away corrupt humors that might accumulate in the night. Sleep, to a Victorian, was a project requiring a full day of preparation. If you were poor, your options were far more basic. Straw ticking stuffed roughly with leftover chaff was common in working-class homes. It was lumpy, it itched, and it bred bugs faster than you could scold them away, but at least it was something. A cheap bed was better than the floor, and there was a certain pride in managing to keep even a straw ticking decently clean in the filthy cities. You might also have draped your bed in layers of wool flannel or even a faded velvet quilt, depending on what your household could scavenge. And those layers mattered. Victorians were sure that proper layering would protect the sleeper from both drafts and demons. Yes, demons. A surprising number of spiritual advisors warned that evil spirits were drawn to half-covered bodies, so tucking your sheets just right became a defense against more than the chill. Lying there half-smothered under a heavy quilt, you might imagine how impossible it would be to move without waking. Victorians complained constantly about night sweats, stiff limbs, and odd cramps caused by the sheer weight of their bedclothes. Yet they clung to them anyway, convinced that a lighter covering would be their downfall. And what of the bed frame? A grand carved four-poster was a status symbol, the very image of respectability. These beds dominated a bedroom like a throne with curtains to keep out drafts and prying eyes. But the working classes made do with simple rope-sprung cots whose cords sagged sadly, unless tightened every week. Sleep tight, in fact, comes straight from this practice, a reminder to check the ropes so you wouldn't sag to the floor overnight. Even the smell of your mattress was up for debate. Lavender was a favorite scent to scatter among the feathers, believed to repel moths and calm the mind. Sometimes rosemary joined in, or a sprig of dried thyme. These herbs might seem quaint, but in the rank, stuffy bedrooms of coal-burning Victorian homes, they were a rare treat for the senses. You can practically picture a weary mother sprinkling lavender between layers of ticking, praying it would hold through the season. Victorians took sleep posture seriously, too. One manual claimed you must lie flat on your back with your arms folded gently across your chest, a look suspiciously like a corpse, if you ask me. But the theory was that this calm pose would discourage bad dreams and keep your breathing steady. Other guides argued for a side position, knees tucked to prevent nightmares. Historians still argue whether these positions were really helpful or just another excuse to scold people into lying still. You shift a little on your own imaginary mattress, deciding which camp you'd belong to: the feather lovers, the horsehair loyalists. Or maybe you'd sneak off to the straw tick, grateful for anything at all. Wherever you landed, your bed said something about you. It was a marker of class, a monument to personal habits, and a nightly weapon against the darkness. So as you lie back, the wooden frame groaning beneath you, you feel that strange combination of safety and burden that a Victorian bed provided. It might itch, it might squeak, it might hold 1,000 fleas in its corners, but for better or worse, it was yours, your private fortress against the night's mysterious trials. And with any luck, its lumps and hollows might just lull you into a deep enough sleep to forget the gaslights, the clocks, and all the worries dancing beyond the window. You eye the jug on your washstand where a faintly sweet, spiced scent drifts upward from an old ceramic cup. This is your bedtime tonic, another essential weapon in the Victorian arsenal against a sleepless night. Before climbing into those squeaky horsehair beds, countless men and women took a sip of something they hoped would soothe their jittery nerves, a nightcap, in the truest sense, with or without alcohol. Victorians loved their elixirs. There was barley water simmered patiently with a twist of lemon. There were warm cups of spiced wine laced with nutmeg and a hint of sugar meant to calm and warm the stomach before slumber. The theory was simple. A gently sedated belly meant a gentler brain. And after a long day of coal smoke, clanging clocks and moral lectures, who wouldn't want a sweet-spiced potion to take the edge off, you raise the cup to your lips, breathing in a sleepy steam that smells of cinnamon and faintly sour wine. Modern medicine would roll its eyes, but the placebo power of these tonics was immense. Even a watery barley drink offered a small ritual of comfort, a pause in the day, a moment of calm that could work better than any lecture on proper morals. Fringe concoctions appeared too. You might have stumbled on a tonic promising to include essence of poppy or a dash of valerian root, both highly fashionable and questionably safe. Apothecaries cashed in on these potions with impressive creativity, bottling them under elegant names like Somnus Elixir or Midnight Repose. If you paid enough, they might even gild the label so you'd feel fancier while you dozed. Historians still argue whether these mixtures did more harm than good, but that hardly stopped the public from lining up coins in hand. For the working class, simpler nightcaps sufficed. A bit of warm milk with a sprinkle of brown sugar was surprisingly popular. You can picture a tired mother stirring a pot on the fire, telling her restless children that this was magic milk guaranteed to chase away bad dreams. And in a way, it was not by chemistry, but by sheer ritual. One curious habit emerged among gentlemen who might sip negus, a weak port wine diluted with hot water, citrus, and spices. Served just before bed, it was seen as sophisticated yet soothing. Of course, a second or third glass of negus was another matter, and more than one respectable lawyer probably woke up the next morning with a tongue thick as wool, cursing his sleep potion. Beyond these drinks, there were claims of vegetable tonics, a suspicious blend of herbs, bark, and roots boiled down into something resembling swamp water. Still, the advertisers insisted it worked wonders on nerves overwrought by modern living. Even in the countryside, where chemical cures were scarce, farmers would brew a mug of thin porridge or gruel with a splash of honey, hoping its warmth would settle the day's worries. There was something deeply human about these nightcaps, no matter how silly they sound now. It was the pause that counted the ritual of holding a warm cup, of telling yourself, "I am about to rest." You can feel that moment now, the steam drifting up, the crackle of the fire, dying down, the hush settling over a household that had finally for once grown quiet. You might imagine sitting with a friend, the two of you, yawning together over your mugs, trading stories in sleepy voices, feeling that unique sense of closeness that comes only when the world has grown dim, and the next day seems 1,000 years away. Those final sips connected people a soft shield against the night. And yes, there were mishaps. Spilled tonic, stained nightgowns, and children sometimes tipped over mugs in their sleep, leaving sticky pools that attracted hungry mice by dawn. The same worries echo through time: who cleaned up the mess, who replaced the broken cups, who paid for more sugar when supplies ran out. Yet the sense of hope wrapped around these bedtime drinks never truly faded. You think of the patient father dosing a child with warm milk by candlelight, whispering reassurances about sweet dreams. The weary wife measuring her barley water and trying to believe it would be enough. The lonely clerk downing his poppy-laced tonic and closing his eyes, praying for even a half-night's peace. Historians still argue whether these tonics were genuine medicine or simply a comforting fraud. But to a tired mind, the distinction hardly mattered. The moment you lifted that cup was a moment you claimed your own peace, even if the rest of the world refused to give it. So as you finish your nightcap, letting its warmth sink into your chest, you feel a hush steal over the room. The clatter of carriage wheels outside softens. The gaslight flickers lower, and you allow yourself to believe, if only for a heartbeat, that sleep is coming, that rest is possible, and that these tiny rituals might yet save you from another night of restless wandering. You slip into your nightgown, its starched folds brushing against your arms, and glance over at the heap of linen and lace laid out for bedtime. Victorians did not simply collapse into bed wearing whatever they happened to have on. No nightwear was a full performance, each item carefully chosen, starched, pressed, and even evaluated for its moral implications. You might laugh, but your average Victorian took bedtime attire as seriously as a royal ball gown. The nightgown itself, long and flowing, was meant to preserve modesty and shield the sleeper from both physical chill and moral decay. Thin cotton in summer, heavier flannel, or wool in winter, often trimmed with lace and sometimes elaborate monograms, your nightgown said everything about your class, your cleanliness, and your commitment to correct behavior. For many, a nightcap was equally essential. The logic was partly practical: keep the head warm in drafty houses, and prevent stray lice or dust from settling in freshly brushed hair. But it also had a dash of superstition. A covered head was thought to block intrusive dreams or even fend off evil spirits that might slip through your thoughts in the dark. Historians still argue whether this was mostly about modesty or an echo of far older magical thinking. Then came socks, or bed stockings, as they were sweetly called. Victorians believed cold feet were the surest way to toss and turn all night, and so many pulled on thick woolen socks before sliding under their covers, hoping to keep the rest of their body calm by keeping the toes cozy. It sounds funny today, but even modern sleep science admits that warm feet can sometimes help you doze off. Maybe they were onto something in their own scratchy, old-fashioned way. Even accessories were part of the nighttime ritual. Women might slip on wristlets or mitts to keep their hands warm, while wealthier folk sometimes wore an extra scarf around the neck, afraid the night air might slip under the covers and chill their throat. One little girl once wrote in her diary that her mother made her wear a wool scarf tied so tightly she could hardly breathe, all in the name of a good night's rest. You stand in front of the cracked mirror nightgown, rustling nightcap, perched awkwardly, and you almost smile at how ready for battle you look. A fortress of cloth buttoned, tied and wrapped in 100 layers, all to shield you from the uncertainties of the night. And while you might feel silly, there is something strangely comforting about the weight of it all. If you had the money, you might even own a dressing gown, a sort of in-between garment worn before officially slipping under the covers. These robes, often made of cotton or even imported silk, showed off a bit of style and wealth while you paced the bedroom, winding down your worries. A gentleman might wear his with a tasseled cord, swishing dramatically as he recited tomorrow's to-do list, while a lady might fuss over delicate embroidery on her sleeve. Victorians believed that your clothing shaped your dreams and even your soul. Loose, gentle folds were meant to calm the spirit, while constricting clothing was scorn for encouraging nightmares and dark thoughts. The proper nightgown became a badge of virtue, a signal to yourself that you were ready to surrender to rest. And heaven help you if the neighbors ever caught sight of you sleeping in something inappropriate. Even a missing nightcap might fuel gossip for weeks. Of course, not everyone could afford the elaborate nightwear laid out in shop windows. The poor often made do with worn-out day shirts patched and rewashed until the fabric nearly dissolved. But even these scraps were carefully buttoned up for bed, because to a Victorian mind going to sleep, properly dressed, was a mark of self-respect, no matter your means. There's something timeless about that idea, isn't there? Even now, you might have a favorite pair of pajamas, a soft blanket, a routine that signals the day is over. These cues help the brain let go, reminding you that you're safe enough to rest. In their own way, the Victorians understood this truth, even if they wrapped it in lace and moral instruction. So you smooth down your nightgown, pull the socks tight around your ankles, and slip under the covers with a faint rustle of cotton. Your hair is tucked, your toes are snug, and the world feels just a little bit softer. Maybe you think there's a sort of magic in the ritual, after all. It's not the cloth that saves you from insomnia, but the gentle promise it carries. You have done all you can. And so you settle down, letting the scratchy warmth of your nightwear weigh you toward sleep. The night stretches on beyond the window, carriages rolling by candles, guttering in hallways, but you lie wrapped in your fortress of linen, and quiet hopes, daring to believe you might actually drift off before the clock strikes 3. A soft knock rattles the latch on your bedroom door, breaking through the sleepy hush. The doctor has arrived, a polite, gray-whiskered gentleman with a worn leather bag ready to investigate your stubborn insomnia. Victorian house calls were common for all manner of troubles, but sleeplessness especially seemed to demand a doctor's wisdom. For rest was the foundation of all health, or so they believed. He steps into the flickering lamplight, surveying the gloomy corners of your room as though they might reveal clues. Your rumpled bedding, the faint scent of vinegar from the freshly scrubbed floor, the nightcap slightly askew, all details he weighs in his mind. Victorians thought sleep was both a medical and moral matter. So the doctor's questions mix physical symptoms with inquiries about your habits, your diet, and your personal thoughts. Have you been praying enough? He might ask in the same breath as, what did you eat for supper? Because in the Victorian mindset, failing to rest properly could suggest a troubled conscience, an unclean spirit, or a lazy will. Historians still argue whether these moral suspicions helped or harmed patients, but they certainly added to the pressure. The doctor examines your tongue, counts your pulse, even checks your pupils with a candle, and then nods gravely. Perhaps he suspects your dreams are too vivid, your nerves too excited. He might recommend a small dose of laudanum, or the gentler path of barley water, or even a special lettuce poultice for the temples. To a modern ear, it sounds laughable. To a Victorian sufferer, it sounded like hope. You try to answer his careful, probing questions about your worries. Has business been too stressful? Have you quarreled with the neighbors? Do you spend too many hours by the new gaslight, reading novels that stir up troublesome thoughts? Every detail feels important, every answer weighed against the expectation of a respectable night's rest. Doctors of the era believed a patient should meet sleep halfway, a phrase you might find oddly sweet if it weren't so heavy with moral scolding. They encouraged evening prayers, calm conversation, no excess food after dusk, and never, absolutely never any raucous singing or dancing before bedtime. The mind should be quiet, the heart steady, the house hushed. As he sets down his bag, the doctor might glance around your room, checking for dampness drafts or unclean corners that might upset the delicate balance of the nervous system. A thorough physician would even test the mattress for lumps, wagging a finger if he found it too soft or suspiciously fragrant with lavender. Too much perfume, he'd say, excites the nerves. Your family gathers at the doorway, whispering behind their hands. Everyone wants to know if you'll be all right. A sleepless member of the household reflected on the entire family's good standing after all. Restful homes were respectable homes. The gossip about a house where no one slept could ruin a reputation as easily as a money scandal. You answer as best you can, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The doctor jots something in a notebook, perhaps, to share with colleagues later. Historians still argue whether these visits genuinely comforted patients or only fed their anxieties, but you try to believe he means well, that he will leave you with an answer that might finally hush your restless nights. And then he gives you advice, sometimes helpful, sometimes utterly impractical. Perhaps you should avoid reading after supper, he suggests, as it might overstimulate the imagination, or eat fewer potatoes, which he claims are heavy on the organs. Or say your prayers twice instead of once. Each piece of wisdom delivered with a tone of absolute certainty, though most were closer to superstition than science. The doctor stands, straightens his vest, and assures you that sleep is a duty. The phrase sticks with you, a duty. Not a gift, not a right, but an obligation. You feel it weigh on your chest as though you failed a personal mission each time you lie awake past midnight. He packs up his small bottles and powders, tips his hat to your worried family, and steps out into the echoing hallway. The air still smells of vinegar and candle smoke, and you catch a last whiff of his sharp cologne before the door clicks shut. Left alone again, you wonder if his words will help tonight. Maybe the barley water will soothe your stomach. Maybe repeating your prayers twice will settle the guilt gnawing in the back of your mind. Maybe the lettuce poultice will cool your forehead and trick your racing heart into slowing down. Or maybe you will simply lie here, as always, feeling the seconds tick past, listening to the carriage wheels on the road, waiting for sleep like a far-off ship you cannot yet see. Still, the doctor's visit gives you a fragile sense of hope. You did something. You called for help. You allowed another human to see your worry and try to fix it. And sometimes that act alone is a cure, or at least a gentle comfort. You close your eyes, repeating his words about duty and rest, promising yourself you will try harder tomorrow, that tonight will be different. The clock on the mantel ticks with a smug, unstoppable certainty, each swing of its polished brass pendulum, reminding you that time is slipping through your fingers. In Victorian bedrooms, clocks were everywhere on the wall, on the bedside table, even hidden inside fancy music boxes, and their steady chimes became both a comfort and a curse. You lie there, eyes wide open, watching the minute hand creep forward. If you've ever felt that dread as you counted the hours, then you understand what your 19th century counterpart faced night after night. The mechanical certainty of a clock in an era of strict schedules only sharpened the pain of insomnia. The factory whistle would scream in the morning, the carriage would arrive at 6, the maid would light the fires before dawn. All of these demanded a rested mind, but the tick, tick, tick refused to let you forget how far you were from sleep. Victorians believed the clock was a blessing for discipline. A working man should keep to time, his hours measured, his tasks neatly packaged. Yet at night, that same clock felt like a tiny tyrant. Historians still argue whether the rise of regimented industrial schedules made insomnia worse or simply made people more aware of it. Either way, those clock hands became the enemies of many restless minds. You imagine lying in bed, the faint echo of distant church bells, joining the relentless chime of your parlor clock. 1, 2, 3, each note, cutting across your fragile dreams. Some people even tried removing the clock from the bedroom altogether, but then panicked at the idea of losing track of time. There was no winning. Too much time, too little time, both were enough to send a person mad. The new railways didn't help. Their rigid timetables made people obsessive about punctuality. Imagine a father pacing back and forth, worrying he might miss the first morning train, convinced that one night of poor sleep would ruin his entire week. In big cities, gaslights shone so bright they seemed to chase away the night itself, blurring the boundaries between day and dream, while clocks kept tally of every stolen moment of rest. You roll onto your side, trying to block out the chimes, but they slip through anyway, as persistent as guilt. Victorians even blamed insomnia on nervous overstimulation, a phrase that sounds suspiciously modern, doesn't it? And the clock was its constant companion, a cold-hearted reminder that the hours you should have spent resting were vanishing forever. In a final attempt to find peace, some families muffled their clocks at night, wrapping them in cloth to hush the ticking. Others hung heavy curtains around them, convinced that dulling the sound might dull the anxiety too. Yet like a child left to cry, the clock still found a way to sneak through the hush. You could stuff its casing with rags, but somehow your mind would still hear it. Victorian physicians weighed in on this with endless opinions. One pamphlet warned that clocks created a condition of mental counting that stopped the brain from entering true rest. Another claimed that clock watching revealed a weak will, that a morally upright person would ignore time entirely and simply let sleep come as nature intended. Historians still argue which of these was more damaging, the clock itself or the shame that came from watching it. And then there was the growing terror of industrial insomnia, a phrase whispered in drawing rooms and working-class pubs alike. People feared that factory work train travel and constant scheduling had so disrupted their natural rhythms that their children would inherit a broken pattern of sleeplessness. It sounds strange now, but to them it was the price of progress paid in exhausted minds and shattered dreams. Your own mind feels that same squeeze of panic even across time. You hear the echo of footsteps on cobbles, the faint snore of someone in the next room, the sigh of a coal fire dying down, all punctuated by the steady, heartless tick. There is no pause, there is no escape. You wonder if you are failing not only yourself, but your family, whose respectability depends on you showing up, bright-eyed and calm in the morning. But there is a dark kind of comfort in that rhythmic sound, too. It proves the world is still turning, that time has not stopped, that you are not alone in your vigil. The clock, as much as it tortures you, also cradles you with its familiarity, reminding you that everyone from the Queen herself to the lowliest apprentice must bow to the same march of minutes. So you sigh, sinking deeper into the mattress, letting the tick-tock join the other night noises as part of your uneasy lullaby. You count along for a while, fighting the dread, telling yourself that sleep must come. Eventually, it always does. And if the clock marks every moment of your failure to sleep, it also marks each small victory when your eyes finally close, if only for a few precious hours. You lie there wrestling with your thoughts, wondering if maybe you're sleeping wrong. Victorians certainly believed you could. Sleep posture was a matter of heated debate, no less important than what you ate, what you wore, or even what you dreamed. Should you lie on your back, perfectly still, arms folded like a dignified mummy, or curl up on your side knees, drawn in as if hiding from the world? One 19th century manual insisted that a proper Englishman should lie flat on his back, arms gently crossed over the chest to encourage orderly dreams and steady breathing. You can almost picture it, a row of well-behaved sleepers in identical nightcaps lined up like church effigies. Historians still argue whether this practice was truly about lung health or just a weird attempt to keep people looking morally composed even in their sleep. Others insisted side sleeping was healthier, since it allowed the heart to settle in a less cramped position. There were fierce debates about which side was best: the left side to help digestion, the right side to keep the heart free of nighttime oppression. A chorus of opinions clashed in newspapers, household guides, and even among doctors. In the end, most people probably flopped around however they liked, but the guilt of doing it wrong hovered like a midnight phantom. Then came the stomach sleepers, branded almost sinful for their posture. Victorian moralists claimed belly sleeping was a sign of laziness, gluttony, or even dangerous moral weakness. After all, it was the pose of a drunkard sprawled without discipline. You shift in your own bed now, thinking how strange it is that something as innocent as sleep position could be policed with such dramatic flair. And it didn't stop there. Some manuals scolded readers to avoid tangling the legs, claiming twisted limbs might disrupt the flow of bodily humors and lead to nightmares. Others warned that sleeping with one arm flung overhead would invite phantoms of the imagination, as if your very dreams were summoned by how you pointed your elbows. It sounds ridiculous, but you know how powerful suggestion can be, especially at night. You might lie awake wondering if that tingling in your toes means you've invited a nightmare, or if your twisted ankle is a cosmic punishment for ignoring your mother's scolding about keeping a tidy pose in bed. There was no end to the things a Victorian might fret over once the candle had been snuffed. They even invented odd sleep devices to correct posture, like stiff leather belts that kept you from rolling over, or bolster pillows to pin you on one side. Imagine trying to fall asleep strapped down like a reluctant mummy, all in the name of moral purity. Yet people tried because nothing was more important than proving you could master your body even in the dark. You listen to the street outside a distant horse clopping along and wonder how many others are twisting and turning just like you, plagued by the same worries. Maybe a neighbor is lying perfectly still on their back arms crossed like a tomb, carving, terrified of rolling over and dooming their dreams. Maybe someone down the street is hugging their knees to their chest, convinced the posture will ward off bad thoughts. You feel a strange kinship with them across time, bound by this shared human longing for a peaceful night. There were occasional voices of reason, of course. One or two medical writers suggested that sleep would come best in any position that felt comfortable, as long as you didn't suffocate yourself with too many blankets. But these calm voices were often drowned out by stricter opinions. After all, strict opinions made for more popular pamphlets. And pamphlets sold well when they scared you. Historians still argue whether these old sleep position fears were genuinely rooted in health science or just another way to control anxious minds. You sigh, shifting again, trying to get comfortable in your imaginary nightgown. Perhaps you would have been a side sleeper, ignoring the scolds and letting your knees curl. Or maybe you would have tried the back-lying posture, convinced it kept your dreams steady. Whichever path you chose, you'd lie awake for a moment, wondering if it was the right path as the clock ticked on and the night deepened. In the end, you do what countless Victorians did. You pick a spot, pull your nightcap lower over your ears, and hope the rest will follow. Because no matter the scoldings, the warnings, or the stiff belts strapped around your chest, sleep is a wild thing. It arrives when it wants on its own mysterious schedule, ignoring all your best-laid plans. So you let yourself relax just a bit, promising that tonight you will stop worrying about posture. You will simply breathe, close your eyes, and trust that you will not wake with your arms flung in scandalous disarray. The world will still be waiting come morning, no matter how you happen to sprawl through the night. You listen through the muffled, quiet ears, straining for a moment of peace. But there it is again, a rattle of carriage wheels, a dog barking 2 houses down, a burst of drunken song echoing off brick walls. Victorian nights were anything but silent, and for a light sleeper, those disturbances might have felt like a curse sent straight from the underworld. As cities grew, so did the noise. Horse-drawn carts clattered at all hours, delivering goods to the market or carrying night shift workers home. Railway trains thundered past. At times, the villagers could hardly believe, letting off puffs of steam that hissed like angry ghosts. Even the ringing of night watchmen's bells, meant to protect the peace, could jolt you awake with a start. For the wealthy, the problem was hardly better. Grand townhouses were rarely built with thick enough walls to muffle the street's uproar. The moment gaslight spread through London and other cities, a new nightlife emerged. People out gambling, singing bawdy songs, clashing mugs together in celebration. And that raucous joy filtered straight through the window panes. You might pull the curtains tight, press a pillow over your ears, but still hear the faint stomp of boots or a cart's squeaking axle. Historians still argue whether all this new racket directly worsened Victorian insomnia or simply gave people something else to complain about. Certainly, there were country folk who returned from city trips complaining that the ceaseless din had ruined their nerves. But even in tiny villages, the night was far from quiet. A rooster might crow at an unholy hour, or a neighbor's baby might shriek through thin walls. Night never guaranteed stillness, no matter where you lived. You lie there blinking at the gaslight shadows and wonder what it would feel like to sleep in perfect silence. Perhaps a blessing, perhaps a curse of its own. Victorians had a curious suspicion of complete stillness, afraid it left too much room for uneasy thoughts or even ghostly visitations. Some claimed a bit of familiar noise, a clock ticking a hearth's crackle, could anchor the soul and keep nightmares at bay. And so people learned to adapt. Heavy curtains muffled street sounds, while straw-stuffed doorstops blocked rattling drafts. Families might scold children for stomping across bare floors after bedtime, worried the echoes would travel through walls and stir delicate sleepers. A few wealthier homes even commissioned double windows, a sort of early soundproofing, though they did little against a determined street singer belting out another verse of Champagne Charlie. As you shift under the covers, your imagination wanders to how you might have coped in those days. Maybe you'd buy earplugs made of beeswax, a common remedy for street noise pinching them into shape before sleep. Or perhaps you'd simply surrender to the clamor, letting it become a lullaby of city life, telling yourself that each rumble and rattle proved you were not alone. There was a strange sort of comfort in that after all. Knowing the world kept turning while you dozed, hearing its rough edges and its constant movement reminded you that life carried on even if you paused for a night. Still, you can imagine that one particularly squeaky wheel or a howling dog might drive you half mad on your third hour without sleep. Some doctors tried to recommend more rural living, urging patients to move from the smoky city to quiet country cottages where pure night air and gentle owl hoots would soothe their minds. Of course, country quiet came with its own worries: creaking timbers, scurrying mice, the occasional fox screaming like a banshee. There was no perfect peace, no matter how far you ran. Historians still argue whether the ideal of the countryside was ever more than a comforting myth to sell a change of scenery. Even inside the house, you weren't guaranteed quiet. Servants bustled about until late cleaning, banking the fires, making sure the doors were locked. A clumsy footfall on the stairs might shatter your fragile half-sleep, or a dropped coal scuttle in the kitchen might ring through the pipes like a gunshot. You could scold them, but even the most careful servant could not move through a Victorian house in perfect silence. And so you settle under your quilt, resigned to the world's symphony. You know the street outside will never truly rest, but perhaps your own mind can learn to accept it. You let the rattle of a distant wheel become a slow, predictable rhythm. You let the hiss of cooling gas lamps merge with your own breathing. Little by little, the sounds fade, not because they stop, but because you let them become part of the night's pattern. Sleep, after all, is never about perfect stillness. It's about surrender. And in a noisy world, even a Victorian mind could learn to make peace with a lullaby built from clattering hooves, distant laughter, and the rumble of the railway carrying dreams into the darkness beyond. You pull the bed curtains tighter around you, trying to block out the swirl of street noise and catch a faint scent, herbs tucked carefully under your pillow. This was no accident. Victorians adored their bedtime charms, their dried bouquets of fragrant plants, and even their occasional superstitious trinkets, meant to protect the mind from restlessness. After all, if a lettuce pillow wasn't quite enough, a sprig of lavender or a pinch of rosemary might just do the trick. Imagine the comforting sweetness of lavender blossoms hidden inside a muslin sachet. This humble flower was one of the era's favorites, praised for its power to calm the nervous system. People tucked it beneath their pillows, dangled it from the bedposts, or even sprinkled it on the mattress itself. Its scent promised a gentle escape from fretting thoughts. Some swore that lavender could chase away nightmares, or at least make them smell more pleasant. Other herbs joined the nighttime chorus, too. Chamomile found its way into small pillows or sachets meant to soothe the heart. Rosemary, long connected to memory and courage, was believed to guard against evil dreams. A handful of mint might be laid near the bed to freshen the air and settle an upset stomach. You can picture a grandmotherly figure fussing with all these fragrant bundles, determined to build a fortress of calm around her restless family. And candles. Oh, the candles. Victorian bedrooms were rarely without them, even if only for a minute before lights out. Some were simple tallow tapers, but wealthier homes burned beeswax candles perfumed with rose or sandalwood. The act of lighting a bedtime candle, letting its mellow glow flicker through a darkening room, became its own signal to the brain time to rest. Some believed the very wax carried a sort of protective blessing, chasing away malicious spirits that prowled sleepless minds. Then came the charms, which straddled the line between superstition and ritual. A child might have a tiny wooden cross tied to the bed frame, meant to keep away night terrors. Others pinned bits of iron or even horseshoes near the headboard to repel witches. Historians still argue whether these protections were genuinely believed or simply inherited traditions followed out of habit rather than true conviction. There were even more curious objects. Some families placed a small loaf of bread by the bedside, convinced it would absorb harmful dreams. A chunk of coal wrapped in cloth might hide under the pillow to ground one's spirit. These seem silly, but in a world without sleep, science, any small measure of hope was welcome. You can almost hear a father muttering prayers as he tucks the bread under his son's pillow, refusing to take any chances with nightmares. If money allowed, Victorians also brought in newfangled air fresheners, potpourri jars filled with dried rose petals and citrus peel. The idea was not only to sweeten the room's smell, but also to purify the air, keeping away the so-called bad humors that might seep into a sleeper's lungs. Of course, modern noses might find these mixtures overwhelming, but to a Victorian they were a breath of reassurance. You might smile, thinking of the elaborate routines layered on top of one another, first a tepid bath, then a lettuce pillow, then lavender under the head, all while a candle flickered low. Each step was a defense against the mysterious beast of insomnia. The more you did, the more protected you felt, whether or not the remedies had any real power. The gentle rustle of dried herbs is somehow soothing in your imagination. Even now, people love lavender sprays and essential oils, leaning on the same faint hope that a pleasant smell might calm a frantic mind. In that way, you and the Victorians share a kinship across time, trusting the nose to quiet the worries the brain cannot. Lying there, you watch the candle burn down, the last golden drops of wax sinking in its dish. The scent of rosemary is faint, mixed with the night air drifting through the cracked window. You feel a little less alone, reminded of every sleeper through history who has laid their hopes on a few sprigs of green and a whispered prayer. And so you let the herbs keep you company. If nothing else, they are loyal guardians holding their fragrances for you night after night. The herbs do not judge your failures to sleep. They do not scold you for your midnight tossing. They simply exist, patient and quiet, offering their gentle comfort. In the end, maybe that's all you truly need, a tiny reminder, tucked under your pillow, that the world still holds soft and hopeful things, even when the night feels unbearably long. The candle is burned low now, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls, and you lie still, half dozing, half listening for any stray sounds. The mind wanders in these moments, and if you were a Victorian, you might have felt a creeping guilt begin to gnaw at you. Because in that era, sleep was not merely rest, it was a moral test. Fail to sleep well, they believed, and you risked exposing a flaw deep in your character. Moralists wrote about this at astonishing length. They scolded the public that insomnia could reveal a sinful heart or a spirit burdened by impure thoughts. If you were wide awake at 3 a.m, clearly something in your soul needed correction. Historians still argue whether this judgment was helpful or deeply harmful, but to a Victorian mind it was a heavy burden to bear. Picture a clergyman giving a sermon on the dangers of unquiet sleep, warning parishioners that a truly righteous person would rest peacefully because their conscience was clean. It sounds unfair, and it stuck. People blame themselves night after night for every hour spent awake, convinced they must have committed some unseen moral failing. You can imagine the anxiety that built up around this. As if everyday worries weren't enough, now you had to worry that your worries were themselves proof of a corrupt heart. It's a dizzying spiral, one you might recognize if you've ever judged yourself for tossing and turning. Victorians felt it even more sharply, since they lived in a culture that measured virtue in every quiet habit, every small act of self-control. If you dared confess your insomnia to a friend, you might be met with a clucking tongue and a lecture about moderation or an insistence that you pray more fervently before bed. The moral messages were woven into every class of society. Rich or poor, you were meant to greet the night with a composed mind and a clear conscience. Sleep was a mirror of your soul, and if it broke well, something in you must have cracked too. You might lie there, heartbeat loud in your ears, worrying about tomorrow's gossip. If the neighbors knew you'd slept poorly, they could wonder what secret sin haunted you. Even a servant might spread rumors if you seemed weary the next day, shaking their head at the unnatural wakefulness of the mistress of the house. Reputation was built on the appearance of calm, and a bad night threatened to shatter it. Some took this idea to extremes. There were pamphlets warning that men who suffered chronic sleeplessness might be headed for moral ruin, or even dangerous radical ideas. Women, meanwhile, were told insomnia made them weak, susceptible to hysteria, or vulnerable to bad influences. No one was allowed to simply be tired. There was always a darker suspicion hidden behind the yawns, yet a few gentler voices did try to push back. Some doctors argued that the mind could suffer ordinary worry without it being evidence of moral collapse. These physicians tried to explain the brain as an organ, not a battlefield of virtue. But their voices were drowned out in a culture addicted to moral perfection. Historians still argue whether these early doctors planted the seeds for our modern understanding of mental health, or were just another bandage on a deep social wound. You turn under your covers, imagining what it would feel like to live with that pressure. A single night of sleeplessness becomes a confession booth, and every yawn the next day a silent admission of guilt. The weight of it settles over you like another blanket, heavy, stifling, impossible to kick free. And yet the Victorians carried on. They went through their night rituals, counted their prayers, adjusted their pillows, and hoped no one would see their bleary eyes in the morning. Maybe you felt that same fragile hope, trying to look perfectly rested for the world while your mind fought through a night of worries. If so, you'd find deep empathy with those anxious Victorians, sharing that timeless fear of being judged for simple human sleeplessness. So you breathe in, slowly telling yourself, even across this gulf of centuries, that there is no moral scorecard waiting to be checked when dawn breaks. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to struggle. The Victorians rarely heard those words, but you can hold them now gently, like a lantern in the dark. As you do, you feel a small flicker of calm, stronger than any herbal charm or barley tonic. Because the truth is, even then, a sleepless night did not mean you were bad, only that you were human restless, hopeful, worried, alive. You listen to the slow hush of the night nearly drifting and think of those last desperate Victorian rituals before true slumber. If all else failed, the lettuce pillows, the tepid baths, the laudanum sips the moral scoldings, you might turn to a quiet ritual of whispered words, a final act of surrender to the night. Prayer was perhaps the most common. Families would kneel the children, squirming in oversized nightshirts, repeating gentle half-sung verses. The rhythm of a prayer felt comforting, a kind of lullaby woven from faith. Some said a proper prayer could chase away nightmares, seal up the soul against the darkness, and bring peace faster than any medicine. It was in their minds a handshake with the divine, a promise that sleep was safe. Beyond prayer, there were counting rituals. Some children were taught to count their blessings, literally, naming each one, while older folk counted their breathing, letting the numbers soothe the racing pulse. You can almost see an exhausted clerk lying on a lumpy horsehair mattress, mumbling 1, 2, 3, until the candle finally sputtered out. Certain families had folk phrases, little charms or verses passed down through grandmothers. Sleep come quick, no demon's trick, or rest to the bones, peace to the mind. Some had no meaning beyond their rhyme, but that in itself was comforting. Historians still argue whether these chants were rooted in medieval prayers or simply invented on the spot in moments of desperation. You pull your imaginary quilt higher, picturing a mother bending over her child, murmuring a good-night wish. There was power in those wishes, a belief that words could shape dreams, that speaking peace could make peace real. Whether superstition or hope, it was a gentle way to surrender the burden of insomnia. There were even small physical rituals, turning the pillow over to the dream side or knocking softly on the bed frame before lying down, as if signaling to your body that it was time to let go. You might smile at that, thinking how very human it is to seek a pattern, a signal, a sign that rest is allowed to arrive. In the quietest homes, these rituals took on a holy stillness. The family might breathe together, let the fire fade, and listen to the long, slow creak of the house settling. Maybe someone recited the Lord's Prayer or simply sighed out a final good night, as if sending those words into the unseen dark. There was a sort of bravery in that moment, in trusting that sleep would come, despite every fear and failure. Even the skeptical took part. Perhaps they didn't believe in demons or divine blessings, but they believed in routine, in doing anything to push back against the night's sharp edge. A ritual was a shield, however fragile, against a mind determined to keep you awake. As you lie there now, centuries removed, yet feeling oddly close to those long-ago sleepers, you sense the comfort in those repeated patterns. They might sound silly, turning the pillow, counting slow breaths, whispering a rhyme, but they were a way to reclaim a little power. In a world that seemed too loud, too crowded, too demanding, these rituals gave permission to rest. You close your eyes, hearing the last sounds of a Victorian house, the clock gently ticking, a dog giving one final bark. A servant banked the fire until only embers glowed. And in that hush, you feel the weight of the night settle, but also the kindness in it. You have tried. You have performed every step, every rhyme, every tiny hopeful act. And so finally, you give yourself permission to rest. You let your breathing slow. You trust that the night will hold you. And you slip into the darkness knowing that even if tomorrow brings more worries, more rattling wheels, more chimes of the clock, there will also be another chance to repeat these gentle, ridiculous, beautiful rituals all over again. You breathe deeper now as the hours lengthen and soften. Let the last threads of your imagination loosen and fade, like candle smoke curling through a quiet bedroom. All those layers, the lettuce pillows, the scratchy socks, the moral scoldings, the barley water have done their part, and now they can rest too. There's nothing more for you to perform, no more instructions, to obey no rules, to keep straight. Feel the hush, settle over your mind as if the night itself is tucking you in with a gentle, invisible hand. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be imperfect. The Victorians worried so much about their dreams, their souls, their reputations. But here, you can let all of that slip away. You can lie in a simple, calm darkness without needing to earn it, without needing to apologize. Your breath evens out slow and easy, matching the deep, soft rhythm of a world at rest. The walls no longer press in. They simply hold you safe. The worries that fluttered around your thoughts are quiet, now drifting to the edges, leaving you alone with a peaceful stillness. If any last sounds remain, the clock, a faint breeze, a memory of distant hoofbeats, let them weave through you without clinging. They are part of the night's lullaby, nothing more. You can trust them to fade, to soften, to slip away. So now ease your shoulders, soften your jaw, feel your chest rise and fall. The world will wait for you. There is no rush, no score to settle, no moral to prove. Only sleep patient and gentle, waiting for you to join it at last.